So Oppenheimer is the latest film directed by Christopher Nolan, and it stars Cillian Murphy, Robert Downey Jr. and Florence Pugh, and it is without a doubt the best film I've seen all year so far. Essentially, Oppenheimer is a biopic depicting the life of Robert J. Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, and it tells the story through a collection of flashbacks as well as a kind of courtroom drama setup as well. Nolan is a director that I have an immense amount of respect for and admiration for in terms of him being one of the only modern day directors who is given the budget to create these big blockbuster films that are his own original creations and loves doing things practically without CGI. I think his choice in actors is fantastic. You know, he loves the big 70mm IMAX format, which is just wonderful. He makes the type of films that we don't really get anymore. But personally for me, I do still find it a little bit difficult to get into some of his films. I do love a lot of his films, like some of his earlier work, Batman Begins and The Dark Knight especially. But his 2010s output in particular just doesn't connect with me on an emotional level, and I feel like a lot of Nolan's worst traits seem to get really amplified in his 2010s output. You know, I've never been a fan of his overly preachy, pretentious dialogue and how complicated a lot of his films and ideas are. Dunkirk was definitely a little bit of a change of pace. That was a film that was very much based on visual storytelling. There wasn't a ton of story or characters in Dunkirk, and it was also the shortest film he'd done. So going into Dunkirk, I thought I'd love it, but that film also just didn't really connect for me. I just found it to be a little bit boring and, again, unemotional. I don't want to sound like a Nolan hater because, like I said earlier, I really respect him as a craftsman and I think he has made a lot of great films. It's just that his latest output just isn't for me. I was still going into Oppenheimer excited and intrigued, but I was also a little bit reserved. This film absolutely surprised me, and I think it is the best film I've seen all year. And this is coming from someone who isn't really a massive Nolan fan. This film was really excellent, and I think because it is a biopic, because it's based on true events, Nolan is obviously much more reserved. And I was able to connect with this film a lot more than a lot of his other films. I'd say this is probably my favourite film that Nolan has made since maybe The Dark Knight or Inception. The craftsmanship in this film is typically just as great as any other Nolan film. I mean, even his weaker films, you know, you have to admit that he is a master of his craft, and this film is without a doubt the same. It looks amazing. It proves to me that the 70mm IMAX format doesn't need to just be used for big action sequences, you know. Despite being a drama, the format that this film is shot in just makes it feel so grand and gorgeous to look at, and even the dialogue scenes, because of the format, it just blows you away visually, and the cinematography, the colour grade and the filmic feel, just how vast and grand the format makes it. It's just an absolute feat of filmmaking, and also the fact that this film is all practical. And just with every other Christopher Nolan film, the cast is amazing. British people will know that Cillian Murphy is a fantastic leading man from Peaky Blinders. I feel like this film will prove to the rest of the world that Cillian Murphy is one of the best actors ever. I mean, he really fully embodies this role, and also even some cast members that pop up, which I didn't know that were in this film, and absolutely blew me away and really surprised me. You know, the casting in this film is absolutely insane. These are things that you expect from a typical Nolan film, but this film also does things you don't usually expect from Nolan films, and that really surprised me and really made me fall in love with the film overall. I think the biggest credit I can give this film, and the biggest reason why I love this film so much more than a lot of other Nolan films, is because it managed to take a subject that I typically don't have much interest in and I don't have much knowledge in, and it really made me invested. You know, by the end of the film, I became really invested in Oppenheimer, in the atomic bomb, in physics, and this point in history that they're on about. And yeah, that is the biggest praise I can give this film. And also Nolan's dialogue. Despite this film being very talky and the dialogue is very similar in style to a lot of other Nolan films where it is very exposition heavy, I just found the dialogue in this film to be so intriguing, and this film actually really reminded me of The Social Network in a lot of ways. The way The Social Network manages to build up so much tension and suspense by just using incredible dialogue and incredible performances. This film does exactly the same thing. And by the end of the film, I just found it to be really emotionally powerful, which again, I don't typically find with Nolan films, you know. Not necessarily in terms of the characters, but just in terms of the real world themes that they are talking about. So how nuclear warfare affects people and affects the world. And I feel like mixing the courtroom drama aspect with the flashbacks makes a lot of the themes and a lot of the character beats and also a lot of the contrasting morals and the character feuds, it just makes it all really interesting. And again, I think a lot of this stems from the fact that it is a real life situation. This is not just a big complicated concept that Christopher Nolan has created in his mind like Tenet. There is one problem I have with the film, however, and it is mostly with the first act of the film. I do feel like this film tries to do too much, and it is, despite being a 3 hour long drama, it is very, very fast paced. I would be very surprised if any of these scenes lasted longer than maybe a minute or two. Constantly moving from scene to scene, subject to subject. I do wish that Nolan would have taken a little bit more time to slow things down a little bit and to focus on the more intimate human moments between characters, because even though this film definitely had an emotional impact on me because of the themes and the subject, in terms of connecting with the in terms of emotionally connecting with the individual character relationships, that's something that again I think Nolan struggles with a little bit here. I saw a review a couple of days ago that pretty much stated that this film feels like a Wikipedia entry. While I don't think that ruins the film at all, I do kind of agree. Especially in the first act where you see Oppenheimer go through education, starting off his career and developing his first couple of relationships with Florence Pugh's character. I didn't really care that much because of how quickly the film was going. I feel like they could have cut a lot of stuff out, a lot of stuff down in order to focus more on other things. So yeah, I do think there's definitely a version of the film out there that is a little bit slower paced, is a little bit tighter in terms of its narrative. It does fly through a lot of stuff really, really quickly, just like a lot of biopics do. It's the same problem that I have with a lot of biopics. But overall, I'd still say that this is a fantastic filmmaking achievement, and this is the type of film that we don't get very often, and I would highly recommend you go see it and support it, because we need more of these types of films. And even though I'm not a huge Nolan fan, I really did get invested with this film. I think the filmmaking and the craftsmanship and performances, like always, are absolutely on point. And it also made me care and maybe invested in a subject that I didn't think I'd be interested in, with his dialogue. I hope going forward that Nolan focuses a little bit more on grounded events and biopics, because I think he really excels at that. So thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.